Welcome to episode 32 of Forest Focus. I'm your host, Paul Wade, with the Regional Public Affairs and Communications Office. In this episode, we returned once again to our series on nature's benefits, which began with an overview in episode 19, followed by a dive into water in episode 21, and a forest fan favorite, recreation, in episode 30. Today, we will focus on a benefit you can't see. Well, you can see the effects of it. It's a bit hard to explain. Luckily for me, we have experts calling into the show from our own Pacific Southwest region of the U.S. Forest Service, our national headquarters in Washington, D.C., and the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, better known around California as CAL FIRE. The best part is Lara Buluc. Lara is back to handle the reins. Lara is the Ecosystem Services and Climate Change Program Lead with the Pacific Southwest region. In this role, she is responsible for integrating ecosystem services, otherwise known as nature's benefits, valuations into agency and partner decision-making. Welcome, Lara.
Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today and help advance the conversation about another priority nature's benefit or ecosystem service, carbon.
Great. All right, I'll take a seat in the back of the class, but take copious notes. Since not all of our listeners may have heard the previous podcast on the ecosystem service of recreation, would you recap the concept of ecosystem services for our listeners?
Absolutely. Ecosystem services, otherwise known as nature's benefits, are the multitude of benefits that come from healthy natural systems. They include tangible benefits like food, fiber, fresh water, and climate regulation, as well as less tangible services like spiritual, recreational, and aesthetic benefits. Ecosystem services also cover the basic processes that underlie these benefits, including oxygen production, soil formation, habitat creation, and nutrient cycling. National forests and grasslands provide an array of highly valuable ecosystem services, including recreation, water, carbon sequestration, and storage to help mitigate climate change, food, air filtration, social and cultural values, timber and other forest products, as well as fish and wildlife habitat and biodiversity. Defining and articulating the value of these ecosystem services enhances our appreciation of these benefits. The Forest Service advances the science and tools that help fully value ecosystem services and better evaluate the management decisions that impact them. Let's now turn to Todd Ontel, a climate adaptation specialist with the USDA Forest Service Washington Office of Sustainability and Climate. Todd is an ecologist with over a decade of experience in forest adaptation, carbon cycle science, and ecosystem restoration. Todd, for starters, could you help our audiences better understand the connection between the Forest Service's climate adaptation response and ecosystem services?
Well, thank you for having me on today's podcast, and absolutely. The Forest Service, in its Climate Adaptation Plan, which was released in 2022, identified several climate-related vulnerabilities that affect its mission. The 6 vulnerabilities, which were grounded by the most recent National Climate Assessment, included, number 1, shifting wildfire regimes, number 2, extreme events and disturbances, number 3 was chronic stressors to watersheds and ecosystems. The 4th is disruption and provisioning of forest products and services. The 5th was environmental injustice and social vulnerability. And then lastly, the last one was threats to agency workforce and operations. So for today's conversation, let's just focus on the 4th, disruption and provisioning of ecosystem services.
Great. That's helpful framing, Todd. Could you also speak to carbon as an ecosystem service and the role of the agency when it comes to carbon stewardship?
Yeah, certainly. So in this era of climate change, carbon uptake and storage are critical benefits from healthy forests. So nearly 13% of our carbon emissions in the US are taken up and stored in America's forests. That includes old growth forests, but also other wildland, urban, and working forests too. Unfortunately, many of these forests are increasingly vulnerable to climate amplified impacts and stressors. If a forest is vulnerable, so is its carbon. Thoughtful carbon stewardship isn't about maximizing carbon, though, particularly because that might be to the detriment of things like forest health or critical wildlife habitat, but rather it seeks to optimize carbon within the context of ecosystem integrity, climate resilience, the other important values that we hold for our forests. It's really about taking a balanced approach. Importantly, some forests, such as those at risk for high severity wildfire, might require hazardous fuel treatments or other forest health interventions that reduce carbon storage in the short term in order to stabilize carbon in the long term. These ideas are at the core of the USDA Climate Smart Strategy, which supports the Forest Service goals of protecting communities and watersheds and creating long-term nature-based climate solutions.
Now that our listeners are more grounded in this topic, let's go yet another level deeper. Since many of our listeners live in California, I'd like to shift to a discussion of the carbon uptake, also known as sequestration, and storage benefits offered by California's 18 national forests. Could you start by providing a definition of carbon uptake or sequestration?
Sure. Carbon uptake or sequestration is the process by which atmospheric carbon dioxide, or CO2, is taken up by trees, grasses, and other plants through photosynthesis. Some of this carbon is used by the plants for their metabolism, kind of like how you and I burn energy in our daily lives and breathe out CO2. But some of that carbon is sequestered through photosynthesis, gets stored in the biomass of vegetation, such as in the trunks, branches, foliage, and roots, as well as being stored in the soil. The National Forests of California are important parts of the climate cycle, serving to store immense amounts of carbon. Approximately 1,554 million metric tons of carbon are stored in the National Forests in California, which is equal to about 3 times the equivalent carbon from all of the transportation emissions in the United States in 2019. How's that for perspective?
Wow, that's an impressive statistic. Could you speak to how this compares to the carbon storage benefits we derive from our national forests in the state?
Absolutely. About 2 million metric tons of carbon are accumulated in above and below ground biomass by the National Forests in California annually. This is equivalent to the energy consumed by about 241,000 homes in a year. Again, the perspective offered by these equivalencies really is key.
Yes, that really is eye-opening. I imagine many of our listeners are interested in how climate change may impact the ability of our forests to store and sequester carbon. Can you speak to that?
This is a huge concern for many, including the Forest Service. Managing California's national forests to a healthy state in the face of a number of threats, such as wildfire, drought, tree mortality, insect attacks, and disease outbreaks, is absolutely critical to stabilizing carbon stocks. We know that climate change, along with the legacy of historic fire suppression, has led to fires that are increasing in frequency, size, and severity. Enhancing the resilience of our forests to these ever-increasing disturbances is critical to maintaining the long-term carbon balance of California's forests. The ability to stabilize carbon stocks is key to preserving the carbon sink benefits of forested ecosystems. Proactive forest management, which includes both thinning and prescribed fire, promotes the longevity of our forests as carbon sinks. In other words, as ecosystems that absorb more carbon from the atmosphere than they emit back to the atmosphere. It's also important to recognize that sustainable management of forests through fuels reduction as well as other activities also yields wood products and biomass, which can be used to further reduce our carbon footprint.
Truly appreciate this perspective and your expertise, Todd. I would now like to shift the conversation to a discussion about the implications of increasingly more frequent and severe wildfires on the ecosystem services of carbon sequestration and carbon storage. For that conversation, I've invited Lance Noxon, Assistant Director of Landscapes and Partnerships within USDA Forest Service Region 5 Fire and Aviation Management, to join us. Lance, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on today. You're spot on. There's no doubt that megafires have been increasing in frequency over the past decade. 5 of California's 6 largest fires in modern history burned simultaneously in 2020. More than 4 million acres burned across the state, double the previous record.
That's certainly a major shift for both our operations and management. Could you provide a specific example of the carbon implications related to one of these 2020 megafires?
Yes, I'll share an example from the Creek Fire, which was the largest single wildfire in 2020, not part of a greater complex in California, burning 379,895 acres. 13 million metric tons of carbon were emitted because of the Creek Fire, which is the equivalent to the energy consumed by 1,565,501 homes in a single year. Increasing the pace and scale of forest health projects is key to restoring ecosystem integrity and related carbon storage benefits. In response to the increasing frequency and severity of wildfires in the state, Governor Gavin Newsom created the California Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force, bringing together a coalition of the best available resources for preventing catastrophic wildfires by creating healthier, more sustainable natural environments. The Governor's Task Force is a proactive effort that is already showing progress towards long-term forest health and safe, sustainable coexistence with fire.
Thank you, Lance. Those numbers are helpful to put the scope of these 2020 wildfires and similarly large wildfires that have occurred in the past couple of years into perspective. And it is heartening to hear about the role of the governor's task force in providing a management response. I imagine some of our listeners are curious about where these numbers on carbon stocks and fluxes in the state are derived. To answer that question, we have invited CAL FIRE's Climate Change and Forest Inventory Fire and Resource Assessment Program Assistant Deputy Director, Dr. Chris Keithley, to the podcast. Dr. Keithley, welcome.
Thank you, Lara. Yes, CAL FIRE and its federal and university partners play a key role in this quantification. Specifically, the CAL FIRE Fire and Resource Assessment Program, otherwise known as FRAP, develops an annual forest ecosystem and harvested wood product carbon inventory through collaboration with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Forest Service Forest Inventory and Analysis Program, USDA Pacific Northwest Research Station, and the University of Montana's Bureau of Business and Economic Research. This annual inventory assists the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection in assessing whether the goal of sequestering 5 million metric tons annually of forest carbon, as established by Assembly Bills 32 and 1504, are being met. Though the Assembly Bill 1504 forest carbon sequestration target sunset in 2020, this report also informs several other carbon-related initiatives in the state. For example, the inventory supports the goals identified in the California Forest Carbon Plan, released in 2018, California Air Resources Board Assembly Bill 32 Scoping Plan updates for achieving the state's greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals, and serves to verify portions of the California Air Resources Board's natural and working lands carbon inventory.
Thank you, Dr. Keithley. It's helpful to understand the state and federal interplay when it comes to monitoring and documenting the state's carbon inventory, both on and off National Forest System lands. Could you also speak to the broader California's forest and rangelands assessment and what the assessment indicators suggest for the future of the forests in the state?
Certainly. As noted in the last CAL FIRE FRAP Forest and Rangelands Assessment Report conducted in 2017, California's forest and rangelands face increasing threats and greater demands on the economic and environmental services that they provide. That said, Californians have proven that they can be at the forefront of tackling challenges such as climate change, where our state has become recognized as a world leader. California's human capital has always been a major strength, and to continue to devise and implement solutions, we will need to successfully draw on the considerable expertise of numerous sectors. The ecosystem service of carbon will be at the forefront of this work.
No doubt. Thank you for the explanation. We are now going to shift gears slightly and spend the remainder of our podcast discussing some of the Forest Service carbon partnership and policies that connect with carbon as an ecosystem service. For this part of the conversation, we have asked Natalie Woolworth to join us. Natalie is the Conservation Finance Program Manager in the Forest Service Washington Office, National Partnership Office.
Thanks, Lara. I appreciate the opportunity to join you to discuss the partnership and policy components of this broader carbon conversation. So for those of you who are not familiar, the Forest Service is in the midst of launching a new national level program in our National Forest System Deputy area called the Carbon Partnership Program. This program is focused on defining the role of National Forest System lands in carbon stewardship projects that leverage external investment. For instance, investment from corporations looking to meet their sustainability goals. Once launched, the program will enable external partners to provide financial resources to accomplish Forest Service projects with quantified climate benefits. And in exchange, those partners will receive formal recognition of their contributions to those outcomes. So at a high level, the program is setting up pathways for the agency to leverage external funding in climate positive projects. And we're doing that by developing first a process for external partners to work with the agency on these projects, and second, procedures to quantify and track the carbon and greenhouse gas benefits from these partnerships. It is important to note that carbon partnership projects across the agency will be undertaken with the goal of carbon optimization, not maximization. And what I mean by optimization is a long-term focus on sustainable, resilient systems, with the recognition that at times, carbon may need to be removed from a landscape in order to achieve that long-term resilience. For instance, by thinning forests at high risk of wildfire in order to reduce the future risk of a large-scale fire that could emit a lot of carbon.
That's really helpful context, Natalie. Could you comment on the opportunities you see for collaboration with other sectors now that the Carbon Partnership Program is more defined?
Of course. So there is substantial opportunity for collaboration with organizations interested in working with the agency to generate greenhouse gas benefits, as well as learn how best to implement land management activities with carbon benefits and quantify the outcomes of those activities. And as I noted earlier, the Carbon Partnership Program will recognize external contributions based on the quantified carbon outcomes generated by an investment, and then contributors can publicize the climate benefits from those projects. In terms of next steps, the Carbon Partnership Program will be announcing a process for partners to work with the agency in implementing these projects. And beginning in 2023, we hope the program will launch demonstration projects in some or all of the following 6 areas. So first, reforestation. Second, forest restoration and resilience. Third, wetland and riparian restoration. Fourth, rangeland restoration. Fifth, methane reduction from abandoned oil and gas wells and mines. And sixth, biochar. So the Carbon Partnership Program, once launched, will accept partners' ideas for projects in these areas, and then the agency will vet those ideas based on our program's criteria and ultimately launch a handful of demonstration projects.
It will be interesting to watch these pilot projects take shape. One thing you have not explicitly mentioned in your program description so far is offsets. Will the agency be engaging in offsets?
Great question. No, through this program, the Forest Service will not sell carbon offsets or generate any tradable or saleable credits or transfer any carbon ownership to other entities. That said, financial contributors will be able to talk about and publicize the quantified carbon outcomes coming from their investments. They just won't be able to offset their own emissions through these investments. And this means that Forest Service carbon partnerships are 100% climate positive, which is a core tenet of the program. We're focused on generating carbon benefits, not on enabling emitting entities to continue emitting. So this niche works well for us. All that said, we do hope this program will support the growth and development of strong private markets indirectly. So one core focus of the program is on testing and refining new ideas around carbon quantification, implementation of land management activities that reduce and sequester carbon, and project structures that can ultimately be brought to bear on the private market context. So we're showing up as an incubator of innovation and learning lab of sorts.
Sounds like there will be an expanded set of opportunities for the Forest Service and its partners to engage with carbon partnerships and the related nature's benefits. Thank you to all our guests for spending some time with us today to discuss this topic from the science, management, and policy perspectives.
To say we have people focused on reducing our carbon footprint sounds like an understatement after hearing all of this. Truly appreciate the collaboration and partnerships. A big salute to Lara and her guests in helping complete another Nature's Benefits episode. I took lots of notes. How about you? The series will continue in a future episode focused on our next Nature's Benefit, timber and wood products. Want to know more about carbon? Please visit agency and partner websites, which are linked in this show's description page. Thanks for listening, and if you're interested in sharing or listening to more episodes, search Forest Focus Podcast or look for us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have questions or suggestions for a show, email us at sm.fs.r5ffpodcast@usda.gov. Until next time, enjoy your public lands. Please remember to recreate responsibly, know before you go, and learn what you can do to prevent wildfires. Take care. This podcast is sponsored by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Forest Service, and the USDA is an equal opportunity provider, employer, and lender.